Hey everybody, welcome to our K-12 cybersecurity webinar series. I'm very excited today to welcome MCNC back to go over our the managed firewall service, do some Palo Alto training. We have a very special guest, Jason Volker from the MCNC cybersecurity team is going to be walking us through that. Ruthie is going to kind of get us kicked off. Stay around to the end. We got a couple announcements, certificate, and the next webinar series, but I'm going to hand it over and thank everybody for joining us.
Thanks, Sammy. Good afternoon, everybody. Like Sammy said, thank you for joining us this afternoon. We're excited to give you some training. So as he mentioned, a couple of housekeeping items. This session is being recorded. So at the end of the session, we will share the download with DPI and the Friday Institute to get it added to the webinar series webpage. So you can share that with any of your colleagues that are unable to join us today. In addition to that, we have the webinar chat turned off, but we do have the Q&A session or Q&A in the session turned on. So if you have questions, post them there. If it's something that I can interrupt Jason with, in the moment, I'll be happy to do so. Otherwise, we'll put the questions in a queue and address those at the very end. And like Sammy said, we do have the certificate of participation for the webinar today at the end of the slides. So stick around for that. And then we'll also tell you about next month's webinar series. All right, so Jason, next slide here real quick. So most of you probably know me at this point, Ruthie May. So I'm the Director of Cybersecurity Services at MCNC. I work closely with Jason Volker. Jason, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Jason Volker. I've been with MCNC for about 4 years now. Been doing network infrastructure, network security for about 18 plus years. And I work on the cybersecurity advisory team and work with security operations on the firewall service.
Great. Thank you, Jason. So just as a quick introduction, just speaking to the next slide here, as many of you know, MCNC partners with NCDPI to make our managed firewall service available to all PSUs in the state. As Sammy mentioned, today's training is going to focus primarily on the Palo Alto service and what you as an end user have access to do. It's going to include, going through navigating the web UI, reviewing your policy configuration, and even including, looking at the Palo Alto Networks Applepedia. That was a new word to me, so thank you for the education on that, Jason. So just a real quick note, if you're not already taking advantage of this service and you're interested in it, at the end of the training, we'll flash up some contact information, and we'd love to have a conversation with you and your team about migrating over to the service. Again, it's a next-gen fully managed firewall solution available to you at no cost. So just as an FYI, we are already scheduling folks for this summer to do some migrations. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Jason to begin the training here, and we'll sync back up at the end.
Thanks, Ruthie. So as she mentioned, this training is on the Palo Alto next generation firewall and how to navigate through it to get information that you would need to investigate anomalies in your network, investigate traffic, and even submit requests for new access or troubleshooting assistance to security operations. There's a lot of information that you can get ahead of time to kind of avoid delays of back and forth with security operations to kind of nail down what your specific ask is. And that's what we're going to go over today. So when you log in, first of all, everybody should have access to their specific Palo Alto firewall through our Panorama management server. If you do not have that access already, please email secops@mcnc.org. They can give you the credentials and a kind of a how-to guide to get all the way to your firewall to start looking at some of these things. And one of the first things I want to bring up that's important for you to look at here is the monitor tab here. And these four things that you see right here, the dashboard, the ACC, the monitor, and the policies, that visibility is available to you right now. You can look at the same things that we're looking at. There's a little bit more information because MCNC is the service provider, but for the most part, you can see everything that is necessary and helpful to you to submit new access, to look at traffic logs, to pretty much understand what's going on inside your environment. You can look on the traffic on the left-hand side menu, the traffic and the threat logs. We've also included the global IP or the global protect logs in here. So that's your remote access VPN solution. You can start seeing who's been trying to log into your network, when they logged in via remote access. So those logs are available to you. But just looking at this, you can see on the left-hand screenshot there, each one of those lines or rows are traffic logs. They're actually hyperlinks. So when you click on one of those hyperlinks right there, it'll populate the query bar for you in the syntax that Palo Alto needs to parse the full log file. So as you click on those links, you can build your own queries. They do use Boolean operators to generate those queries, but very important thing to understand there. If you don't know what the syntax is, just click on the link and you'll see that it'll populate up there for you, and you can manipulate that as you want. The other thing on the right-hand screenshot you can see is the policies section. This is where you can see how your security and your NAT policies are constructed. You can see which ones have been used, which ones have been not used, and those zero-use policies. You can see what objects are used as a source object, a destination object, a port or a service, meaning TCP or UDP, or the application ID that the policy is using to allow or deny traffic through the firewalls. So all of that is visible to you. You can even see the objects, how they were created and what those object values are. So you can further understand what your security posture, overall security posture on your firewall looks like. And if you have, again, this is all about submitting requests to security operations for whatever you need to do to support that firewall. So just creating that traffic query again, this screenshot shows you how to do it. It uses the Boolean operators and an OR, and you can even nest those with the parentheses. So if you want to have source outside and a specific destination IP, you can nest that into a single parameter, and then use another Boolean operator to do a port. You can play around with it in the traffic logs, but yeah, if you haven't had a chance to do that, I definitely recommend giving it a spin to make sure you're comfortable with doing that, doing those types of queries. And if you do need assistance, again, you can email secops@mcnc.org, and they can jump on a call and give you a little bit of assistance to help you navigate through that web UI. So this is an example of one of the security policies that you would see in that policies tab. The syntax you'll notice on the name of the rule on the left-hand side is 0015. We use this type of syntax to identify the direction of traffic for the network or for the security policy. 0015 means it's coming from the inside zone, meaning your internal network, and it's going to the outside zone, which is the internet, more or an untrusted. Those zones are the same for every one of the firewalls all across NCK12. They're part of our engineering standard when we migrated these firewalls. You'll also see syntax rules like 0001, which indicates it's from the outside to the DMZ. Most people do not have a DMZ in the NCK12s, but some do. You'll see a 005, which means outside to the inside, internet source to an inside asset. The 005 rules are probably the most vulnerable, I would say, to internet threats. And that's where we want to try to lock these rules down to make sure that we're pushing least privilege as far as possible on these rules, so that you don't get any unwanted connection attempts and an attempt to try to compromise that asset or whatever that's talking to, or whatever that traffic directionality is. But for this example right here on the screen, this is one of the requests that we received early on last year when the DPI reporting kind of changed what their destination IP was, and we had to update a lot of services or a lot of policies on the firewall to reflect the service. We only knew that the port came in as TCP 2220. That's a service rule, and our baseline posture, our baseline requirement is to try to push application ID as much as possible. So only knowing the port, we had to observe the traffic for this particular policy to see what does the firewall say the application is that is using this rule. And it was SSH because it was an SFTP type of service. So that's secure file transfer. That's the encrypted part. Unencrypted is TCP/21 or file transfer protocol. So this one we were able to push in under the application section right here, TCP, or I'm sorry, SSH, because that's the way the firewall reads it. But you can, if you knew what the standard port is for this application, you would know that TCP 2220 is not the standard port for SSH. It's actually TCP 22. But we can force the firewall to accept that and match the traffic and further lock down this rule by forcing it with this TCP 2220 service on a non-standard port for SSH. So that's just one of the ways that the Palo Alto has that capability to go further than what the ASAs or some of the packet filter firewalls that we were using all across K-12 prior to this service. That just demonstrates the capability of what this can do for you. Something new that we just opened up to the NC K-12 clients is something called the Application Command Center. This is a very, very powerful tool to give you kind of that holistic view into the traffic that is traversing the firewall. And it doesn't matter the direction. You can set up queries to identify specific rules, specific IPs. But one of the top four things that I would say that this ACC shows you is: one, application usage. Displays your top 10 applications used on your network. Since this is an application layer firewall, not simply a layer 3-4 firewall, and the Palo Alto is identifying what specific application is actually using that rule, not just the port, but what's the application. The ACC is one way that this can tell you. Traffic logs are another way that you that it can tell you if you're monitoring those traffic logs. But this helps us to further harden up your security policies by using that application ID tuple with a standard default port or with a specific port to lock it down. You can also see source IP usage. The ACC displays your top 10 IP addresses. Those are the ones that are the most chatty on your network. What's causing the high rate of traffic that goes through the firewall? Where's the bandwidth being used from? The ACC can help you with that. Sometimes that identifies a misconfigured system on your network that's trying to do a lot of things. Other times it may point to some kind of an anomaly, not necessarily malicious, but something that an asset should not be doing. ACC can help you narrow that down. If you notice, if you've ever, for those of you that logged into the firewall and you've tried to look at the traffic logs, you may notice that they get overwritten, meaning you have only a certain amount of time or history in the traffic logs to look and examine what your network is doing. The ACC goes back much further than your traffic logs. So, for example, you may have overwrites of up to as little as 6 hours or up to a week on your traffic logs, but the ACC can pull metrics on traffic that's going back 60, even 90 days. It doesn't necessarily give you the logs, but it gives you a lot of the information that those logs contain. And that's why this tool is so powerful. One thing that is definitely something you want to take a look at in the ACC is your destination region. Think about what your K-12 needs to talk to on the internet. Does it need to talk to assets in Russia or Eastern Europe or Africa or India or China, things like that? You can get that information from the traffic logs, but what's the history of it? That history is what you lose in the metrics. So if you can go back 90 days in the ACC and say, I have a lot of traffic going and one of my top destinations is Russia, maybe you want to put a geographical block to block that region from your outbound network. And I'm going to show you how to do that in a second. And then last, this fourth one is the rule usage. What are the top rules that are being hit on your network, regardless of traffic directionality? What are the top rules that your firewall is using to allow traffic or even to deny traffic? The ACC will tell you that in one of the tiles. And all of this information, and when you see the ACC here in a second, all the information is exportable to a report. So you don't necessarily have to keep staring at the screen to try to identify what's going on with your network. If you want to pull that snapshot report, the ACC and the Palo Alto will allow you to do that. So, as Ruthie mentioned, Applepedia. This is Palo Alto's application database. Very, very useful tool. I use it all the time when investigating firewalls, traffic, and trying to harden up security policies. You may have heard us talk before about the hardening project that we're doing, where we're trying to improve the security posture and the rule sets on your firewalls as they were migrated from the ASAs. One of the tools that we're using to do that is to figure out, what does Palo Alto say this application is for? What's the risk rating, as you can see down here? What's the risk rating on that application? Does it even need to be allowed going through the network, either inbound or outbound? Something that we should consider as part of your overall security posture. How can we improve that? Applepedia, I would definitely bookmark this, applepedia.paloaltonetworks.com. It is a public-facing IP. You don't have to log in to use it. And you can research anything that you find in the traffic logs, pull it up in here and see what Palo Alto has to say. They have a very, very robust intelligence team that is looking at these applications and determining risk for us. So definitely use them. It's a free tool. There's no reason not to use it. And that's what we're looking at in the firewall hardening project, or anything that we do when we're analyzing new requests from certain users. We want to try to use the application ID rather than the service port. What that does for us is allows the firewall to block any application over a port that it's not supposed to be using that port. So if you think back to the slide with the WinSCP example, suppose that was just TCP 2220 and we didn't have destination IPs in the policy, and it was just kind of an any over that port. That is a data exfiltration channel that a compromised machine can get data out of your network just using that port without the firewall identifying the application. But because we can put the application ID in there of SSH, now that is not a data exfiltration channel. The Palo has to see that it is secure shell traffic in order for the traffic to be allowed through the firewall. And Applepedia will help you identify what those applications are and whether you want them to traverse your network. So during the hardening project, one of the things that we discovered on the default browse rule, or kind of the wide open rule, where it had a lot of TCP services, especially TCP 80, TCP 443, is subscriber VPN applications. These applications are used by users or even machines to go do a covert tunnel out to a destination that bypasses your Zscaler web filtering. We currently have an application group that is available to you to implement this kind of a rule if you would like, that has 21 different subscriber VPN applications. This screenshot here is just some of the few that Palo Alto recognizes as risk 5. But we have 21 that we identified across the firewalls that we've done the hardening project on, that we can implement a rule right now. If you submit a ticket to secops.mcnc or at mcnc.org, we can implement an application block rule to block those subscriber VPN applications in your network. So something for you to consider, and you don't have to wait for the hardening project to come around to you if you want to take advantage of that. And this is the list here. One of the most common ones we see are OpenVPN, BetterNet VPN, and there's a couple one here, but this is the group right here. You can go, if you have access to your firewall, you can go in and see this object right now on the Objects tab and see what all these applications that we have in there. If there are legitimate applications in that list and you don't want to use that entire list, we can just clone that object for you and pull out the one that you say, hey, this is legitimate on our network. We don't want to block it, but we want to block all the other ones. That is a very, very simple mouse click configuration change that we can do for you. But blocking stuff like this is very helpful and blocks those covert tunnel attempts and even bypassing your Zscaler. That's what these groups are designed to do, and that's what the Palo Alto is capable of doing for you, and why it's much better than those packet filter firewalls. One of the other things that we're doing in the hardening project that you do not have to wait on for us to come around to you is a geographical block. What we're doing is put a geographical block at the very top of your rule set that blocks any IP address inbound to any asset in the DMZ zone or your inside zone that does not originate from the US or Canada. We put Canada in there because the schools that we've worked with so far have had vendor support or some other reasons why Canadian IPs needed to be in there. Doesn't necessarily have to be that way for you, but that's our starting point for the geographical block. So if you see the policy down in here, it negates the US and Canada, meaning it allows source IPs from the US or Canada to come into your network, but blocks everything else with a drop and an ICMP unreachable. In other words, if something tried to reach your firewall or assets from Russia, it just goes to a black hole. There is no response from the firewall. There is no response from any of your assets. It just pretends like something on that in your IP range does not exist. And that's what we want. To date, I think we've had about 20 or so firewalls with this geographical block put in. Already, I lost count. I stopped counting, but we've had over 1.5 billion, that's billion with a B, unwanted network connection attempts already just on the 20 or so firewalls that we put this on. So you do not have to wait for the firewall hardening project to come around to you to have this rule on your firewall. If you do want this rule on your firewall, send an email to secops@mcnc.org and they can put that on for you right now. So let me show you the ACC real quick before I go on to the next one. This is a live demonstration on one of our lab firewalls here. You can see how the tiles are set up to give you these regions. You can also see some of the top applications that are used on this particular firewall. Keep in mind, this is a lab firewall, so you're not going to see the type of applications or traffic that you would on your own firewall. But this is just a demonstration on how you can use it. You can see which ones here are using the most bandwidth, how many sessions are created, and you can export it with this little square right here and the arrow coming out and export the snapshot. This user activity tile right here demonstrates where are your peak times and what networks are the chattiest during those peak times. You can do it by sessions or even threats or bytes, but this is a very good indicator of what's happening in your network. And also if you're doing this historically, and if we want to drop this down right here and go back 30 days and let this repopulate, you can see over time and do a little bit of trend analysis like this. What are the most active times in my network? And that helps you spot some anomalies if you have off-hour traffic happening when there shouldn't be off-hour traffic and you see some spikes here. That is definitely something that you want to investigate. And because the traffic logs overwrite at a certain point of time, they do fill up, you can use this ACC and go back and see what is actually happening during that time that we need to take a look at. That's just another way the firewall is a useful tool for you. You can also see some of the, this is the tile right here, so you can see some of the rules that are most hit in your network. So if you have, looking at the traffic directionality, these are our management rules. You can see these on the firewall already, but if you have those 0015 rules and you have one that is basically an any or has a big list of TCP and UDP ports, you can see how often that is hit, how many bytes it's using, the sessions that it's using, and how many apps the firewall is seeing that is using that particular rule. This is one way where we're identifying what we can pull out and use as an application ID during the hardening project. What is the application seen by the firewall that we can make an app ID rule instead of using a service rule, and then try to phase out that service rule over time, maybe in the next iteration of the hardening process. But again, this is just another way the firewall can help you out. You can also see this tile right here. You can also pull up where's your internet traffic going? Is it going to Russia? Is that one of your top destination countries? Is it China? Is it somewhere around here, even Eastern Europe, where most of the botnets are taking place right now? But this is something that you can take a look at, submit a ticket to SecOps and say, you know what, we want a geographical block for our outbound internet traffic and blocking these regions. We don't have any reason to talk to these countries, so let's go ahead and block it. Again, that's just cutting off those data exfiltration channels if you have one of those wide open rules, and this is the way that it can help you. But very, very useful tool. If you have any questions on this as you navigate through it, just submit the ticket and somebody will be happy to step through some of the basics with you. But I definitely recommend everybody go take a look at this tab right here, understand how to use it and how to better secure your environment. So that brings us to what to do when you're submitting a ticket to security operations. We want to be able to stay within our SLAs and provide you the best possible customer service and avoid any kind of delays of making your request successful in the time that you expect it to be successful in. So when you're submitting a request to security operations, please remember some of these tidbits here. What are the requirements? In other words, what are you trying to do in the new access? It's important to kind of list that out with your source IP or network. Where are you coming from? And then what is your destination or network? Where are you trying to go to? That technical information is necessary to avoid the back and forth that you may see in the ServiceNow tickets that may delay implementation of your access request. One of the most important things is that destination port. Is it UDP or is it TCP? Is it a range of ports or is it a single port? And using Applepedia, now that you know what that is, can you put those access requests, instead of using a service like TCP/22, can you turn that into SSH? And this is how you can do that. Say, I need TCP/22. You can just type in 22 right here. These are all the applications that use standard port TCP/22 or have the ports in there. So if I scroll down to SSH right here and pop this window up, I can see that standard port TCP/22 is for SSH. So when you submit your access request and you need TCP/22, it's probably okay to say, you know what, the application ID is SSH. We can do it that way. And the firewall will still allow your traffic. But some of the other things that you can use this tool for, looking at your high risk stuff, you may see some of these applications right here on that wide open rule, especially like things like peer-to-peer network. You can filter that out like this and say, you know what, this entire list of applications, we have no reason whatsoever for this traffic to be going across our firewall and being allowed. Submit the ticket and we can go ahead and block that stuff very easily in an application rule. But this is just a way how you can identify using the ACC tab right here, your top talkers in your network. Is it allowed? You could go in and look at the risk rating and see what Palo Alto has to say about what that application is. And if it's used by malware or has vulnerabilities. In this particular case, yes, it does. Probably something you do not want to have going across your network. Whenever you're submitting a troubleshooting request, again, kind of the same tidbits apply or standards apply here. We kind of use a three-part test on trying to isolate what your problem is. So if you can tell us in your initial request where you're coming from in your network with that source IP or that source network, what are you trying to reach, that destination IP or network or port, and then tell us, has it ever worked for you before? Because that is an indicator to security operations if this is a break fix or is indeed a new access request, and they kind of get handled in a different way. One is a break fix. That means it's an incident that we need to get you up as soon as possible. The other one's a new access request that has different types of SLAs and it's documented in a different way. So if you can provide that information to us in your initial request to security operations, we can help you and kind of avoid those delays in resolving your problems. So that's all I had, Ruthie.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we wanted to run through this training and then really give you guys the opportunity to ask questions of us. So we'll keep this slide up here. This has the technical contact information. So if you have a request that needs to come in, you can do that in two ways, as Jason mentioned, one being secops@mcnc.org, that's the email alias, or you can go through our website and open a ticket there. The security operations team does have a phone number that you can call them directly, 919-248-4141. And then I am one of the escalation contacts for this service, but Stephen Walton is the security operations manager. So he would be your best point of contact for escalation from a technical side of the house. And then if you need from, service related, contract related, things like that, I would be your better contact there. So we're going to keep this slide up for a minute here and give you guys the opportunity to ask us questions specifically around, what we've been walking through training wise. If there are things that you would like Jason to explain on how you could do something right in the Palo Alto. So we're going to give you guys the opportunity to do that then. And I can start with my Jeopardy music as you are feverishly typing away your questions in the Q&A here. It's also possible, Jason, that your training was so perfect that there are no questions to be asked.
I like that one.
Yeah. All right. So first question.
Go ahead. It's even more awkward when you're sitting in a room with 100 people and you ask a question, everybody's just staring at everybody else.
Fact. This is why Zoom sometimes is better. So there's a question about how long it takes to access Panorama. Usually takes about 2 minutes for that to load. Is that typical? I'm not sure if that's a typical expectation, Jason. I don't know if you know that specifically, but it's something that we could definitely take back to the team and see if that is expected behavior or if it's something that we can look into and figure out if we can speed that up for you.
Yeah, the way the connection attempt works for somebody coming from the outside, there may be some latency because it has to go through the Akamai cloud through secure application access, talk to Panorama, and then deliver that response back. So you have several different places where encryption and decryption is happening. So there may be a little bit of latency trying to get into that initial panel. But after that, you shouldn't see any latency at all. Very, very little.
Yeah, so thanks for that question, John. We'll take a look at that. We'll sync up with the network engineering group and see if there's anything else that we can do for you there. All right. So it was mentioned during NCET that the logging for this service is for 24 hours with the combination of this and CrowdStrike. Would you recommend for logging in a school district to invest in a SIM? So the logging for the service, and I made the mistake of sort of throwing out a statement at NCET around logging, so apologies for the confusion. So we are keeping all but the traffic logs for a year. So MCNC does have access to the configuration logs, the VPN, global protect logs. So we have access, and then the event logs, right, around the threat event traffic, and we are maintaining that for a year. So it's the traffic log piece that is available to you through the individual firewall. So on the local firewall, you can go and you can pull the traffic logs specifically. So what we enabled last fall, if you do want to maintain your own traffic logs, that we can enable it where the traffic logs can be sent to your own log server that you're maintaining. So that is something that is available to you. And if you're interested in setting that up and or having a conversation with SecOps about that, that's a secops@mcnc.org again question. So let's see here. We had another comment about the latency when signing in, but once connected, it's fairly responsive on your end. So that tracks with what Jason was saying of potentially the logging in piece may be a little bit slower, but once you're in through that secure connection, then you shouldn't see any of that latency. All right, and Michael, did that answer your question around the log piece? And one thing that I will say, there is an open discussion with NCDPI around traffic log retention as well. So I don't have an answer and or anything else to share around that, but there is open discussion happening about that piece. All right, let's see here. What other questions do we have?
While we're waiting on the PSUs, I have more of a higher level, maybe kind of a program perspective for you. You know, the initial effort was to sort of get transferred over from the ASAs onto the new platform. You guys are going through the hardening process now. What is sort of are there any future steps or kind of on the roadmap type of things for this particular service to do after kind of the hardening sort of wave of things? What's in the future coming, if any? I hope I didn't put you on the spot too much. Just curious what that looks like.
Yeah, so it's kind of an interesting answer because it's going to be more hardening is really the next big thing. So as you mentioned, Sammy, you know, the initial service rollout, we migrated close to or over 230 firewalls, and the way that we did that was agreeing to take the existing configurations of your previous firewall, do some looking at those policies, seeing if there was anything egregious, but essentially it was a lift and replace for those previous policies onto the new Palo Alto firewall. And then, as you mentioned, and as Jason was mentioning through the session, it's now that time to go back and actually, now that we have traffic running through these firewalls, they've been up and running, and we're able to determine whether or not those policy rule sets are being utilized or not. We're going back through and doing that hardening exercise. So I think we did a webinar last fall on the hardening exercise specifically, and that's linked on the NCDPI Friday Institute webinar page that talks about what those steps are, what we're including overall in that, and again, including that geo block. That's the big one, or one of the big ones. But so we're going to go through this larger hardening exercise, which the first one is going to take us the full year, right? Because we are doing a real deep dive into each firewall to do that review. And then once we get through that initial review, then it's going back and doing that same thing annually. But it's less around, hey, this firewall rule came in from the old firewall, right? And now we need to determine whether or not it needs to stay here. And it becomes more about, hey, so yes, we reviewed this. We agreed to keep it here last year, but now it's no longer being used. Let's go ahead and clean this one up. Let's move this off, or let's maybe take it from, you know, that old rule set over into an app ID policy. So it's going to be, you know, going back through that hardening exercise, but at a less grand scale as this initial project. So that's really the biggest, I would say, projects, right, and things that are happening in the near term. Jason, I don't know if you can think of anything else, but I would say that's probably the one that we would highlight there.
Yeah, the hardening process is iterative. So this first round that we're doing is we're doing a lot of cleanup, but we're also setting the firewall up to identify stuff that we can clean up the next go round. So we're splitting up those really big rules to figure out what is actually using them by object, and creating different policies. So one policy that you have on your firewall right now, pre-hardening, may be 10 policies post-hardening using the application ID, because we just want those other ones to go zero use eventually. So, and it's also a good way for you to identify whether you want that application on your network or not. So again, using the ACC with the Applepedia support, that's the kind of stuff you can identify throughout the year. And when it comes back around in the next iteration, we can start putting in some better policy, harder policies.
Thanks, Jason. Could you go back in the lab? Can you show, or maybe can you show us if you can determine whether or not the geo block has been implemented or not? Is that something that they'd be able to look at? I know that Pete, the answer to your question, where can we look to see if we're already utilizing the geo block? If you've already gone through the hardening exercise with us or you've opened a ticket right with us in the meantime, you can go to you can feel free to reach out to secops@mcnc.org and we can look at that. But is that something they can check for themselves, Jason?
Yeah, so it's going to have a tag on it with a red GeoBlock script here, and it's going to be at the very top. It's going to be number 1 on your post rule set, or under the 60 rules, which are our management rules. So if you don't have it already, you can put this in, but that's how you would identify it at the very top of above the 05s or 01s, but below the 0060s. But look for that red GeoBlock, because this syntax right here all the way through is the exact same on all the firewalls. The only difference would be whether somebody wants to include Canada or not.
Great. Thank you, Jason.
So Ruthie, I got one more for the team here. I'm full of all kinds of fun stuff today. I know MCNC has been working on the transition from kind of sort of the edge guard over to the tax service management stuff, sort of rolling that type of stuff out, getting that up and running. Since both of the Palo Alto firewall is Palo Alto, as well as the new Expanse stuff, do we ever see any opportunity for any connection between those two systems to share some information back and forth? Is there any opportunity that you're aware of that may go there or not? I'm just thinking Palo, seems like they would have something to do with each other potentially. Just didn't know if that was anything on the radar or anything you guys had looked at.
Yes. So the answer is definitely maybe, as in all things in cybersecurity. It depends, right? So the answer is ultimately yes, and it's something that we will be looking at after we do this initial rollout. So there's no necessarily timeline and or deliverable on it will do this, right? Once we get through this initial migration, but it is something that we're aware of. The same with a CrowdStrike integration as well, having that additional information that's available then in the Expanse platform. Great question.
Thank you.
All right, what other questions do you guys have for us? All right, well, if you're feverishly typing, I'm going to give you just a quick another minute here. Jason, would you go to the next slide here? And Sammy, do you want to talk about the certificate of participation?
Sure. So this came up a few webinars prior. PSU says, hey, we're attending these sessions, we're learning some great information. Is there any way we could get some type of CPE credits for this, CEUs? And so this one is available here. It's a force copy link. I think Tim created this one. Tim or Amir created this one for us, but it's set up for this specific one. It says 0.1. So just somebody had to explain that one to me. 0.1 continuing CEU. So that's really on kind of that CEDL continuing education credit scale. Feel free to translate that if you were doing something like a cybersecurity certification. Like we don't do 0.1, so 1 hour would be 1 credit. So you translate that any way you want, but this is your certificate. You click the link there, put in your name, and that is your evidence that you attended this. It's sort of a self-reporting type of thing, but that's available for this one. Thank you for sharing that.
Yep, perfect. Thanks, Sammy. And then the next slide here is the upcoming webinar series for next month, April 10th. 1 p.m. again is CrowdStrike. So as you know, CrowdStrike is the vendor of choice for the managed endpoint protection service that DPI through MCNC provides to all of the PSUs in the state, or is available to all the PSUs in the state. So the CrowdStrike team is going to come and provide a threat update around threat intelligence that is relevant to the K-12 community. So that's going to be on April 10th. So the registration link is there But the additional information right around the webinar series can be found at that bottom link there. That's also where you would be able to go and find the recording for today's webinar series. Sammy, do you have that certificate link handy that you could paste in the chat? Or I don't think I can copy from. Hang on, I can do this. I can do this. I got this, friends. Give me a second. All right, so this is the registration link for. Let's see here. I'm gonna put it in the chat. All right. That is the registration link for the webinar. This is the webinar series registration link, or I'm sorry, website. And the certificate is right here. Can't copy from chat. Well, let me see if I can paste it in the Q&A answers.
I was able to copy those from the chat on my side. I opened up both just to make sure they were working correctly. I've put links before and nobody had access, but it worked for me on my side.
All right, I just pasted all of the links in the Q&A as well, so I'm not sure if you can see, or everyone should be able to see that, and I'm not sure if that will pop up for you as or not. Perfect. All right, we got it. Anybody else with any other questions and or links or anything else that we can send to you today? All righty. Well, hearing no other questions, I want to say thank you to DPI for giving us the opportunity to give this update. Thank you to Sammy and team for helping us coordinate. You have our contact information. Lots of smart people at MCNC would love to answer what questions that you have around the firewall service. We look forward to continuing going through the hardening exercise with many of you over the coming months. And we look forward to working with you in general around the cybersecurity services that we have the opportunity to provide to you. So hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Sammy.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.